I heard my name spoken, but not with love. A low voice in the middle of the night said, "Tomorrow morning she'll be gone. The papers are already signed." I froze behind the half-open door, realizing I had only hours left to keep my freedom. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like a burden in the eyes of your own family? Share your feelings in the comments, and tell me, where are you watching this from? Don't forget to subscribe, because every story here is a wake-up call someone out there desperately needs. My name is Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, a retired teacher. I spent 4 decades in classrooms teaching children that truth and courage were their greatest weapons. I believed that. I believed my daughter Melissa would never betray me. I believed moving into her home after my husband Henry's death would give me comfort and safety. But that night, in the stillness of a Houston suburb, that belief shattered. The whispers from her bedroom carried down the hallway, slicing through the dark. "Daniel." My son-in-law spoke in a calm, almost careless tone, as if he were talking about the weather. "Don't worry. She has no idea. Tomorrow morning, the van comes. The papers are signed." I clutched the wall, my heart slamming so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Then Melissa's voice, my own daughter's voice, answered softly, uncertain, but not resisting maybe. "Maybe it's for the best. By tomorrow, it will all be done." For the best, my lips moved soundlessly. I wasn't senile. I wasn't helpless. I was a mother, a grandmother, a human being. But in their eyes, I had been reduced to pension checks and a house they could sell. Daniel's next words carved into me like a blade. "With her money, Ethan's tuition is covered, and we can finally get that new place. Everything's set. She won't know until it's too late." The hallway light flickered, catching the tremor in my hand. The kitchen clock ticked toward 2:30 a.m., less than 6 hours before dawn. Less than 6 hours before I was erased from my own life. Terror pressed down on me heavy as stone, but underneath it, something else began to stir. A spark. I thought of raising 5 children on a teacher's salary of the nights I walked home in the rain to make sure they had shoes and books. I thought of Henry's last words, his hand squeezing mine. "You're stronger than you think." They believed I would go quietly. They thought age had weakened me. But that night, I swore to myself I would not let them write the ending of my story. I would escape. The memory of that night still seared into me, but it hadn't started there. No, like most betrayals, it began much earlier, wrapped in the softness of sympathy disguised as love. 6 months before I stood frozen in the hallway at 2 a.m., I was standing in the kitchen of my own home, the house near Galveston, where Henry and I had built a life for 40 years. The air still carried the faint scent of his aftershave, still echoed with his laughter when the grandkids visited, still held me like an embrace, even though he was gone. When Henry died of a sudden heart attack, the silence in that house was unbearable. Each creak in the floorboards sounded like grief itself. I was drowning in it. Melissa came often in those first weeks, her arms full of casseroles, her voice thick with pity. "Mom," she said one evening, sitting across from me at the oak table Henry built with his own hands, "you shouldn't be here alone. That house is too big for you now. Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." Her words were honeyed, laced with promise. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. After all, she was my daughter, the little girl I had once tucked into bed with fairy tales, the young woman I watched walk down the aisle in her wedding dress, the mother of my grandson. If I couldn't trust her, then who could I trust? I looked around the house that night at the framed photos on the wall, at the seashells Henry and I collected on beach walks, at the quilt my own mother had stitched that still smelled faintly of lavender. Every object whispered of the life I had lost. I told myself Melissa was right, that letting go was not weakness, but survival. So I began packing. Not everything, of course. How could you pack 40 years into boxes? I chose the essentials. Henry's wedding ring, my journals filled with decades of thoughts, the pearl earrings he gave me on our 20th anniversary, the photo of all 5 of our children lined up on the porch, grinning with ice cream cones melting down their hands. I sold the rest piece by piece, as if cutting away parts of my own body. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood in the driveway one last time. The house looked back at me, windows like eyes pleading with me not to leave. The waves in the distance whispered, "Stay." But I climbed into Melissa's car and told myself this was a new chapter, a safer chapter. Their home in Houston was modern, all gleaming white walls and manicured lawns, the smell of expensive candles covering the air. At first it felt comforting, almost too perfect. Daniel greeted me with a smile that never reached his eyes. Melissa fussed over me, smoothing my pillows, insisting I rest. "You don't have to worry anymore, Mom," she repeated. But worry, I realized later, wasn't something they were taking away. It was something they were planting subtle, steady growing roots deep beneath the polished surface. And though I didn't know it then, every box I unpacked in that house was another thread tying me into a trap carefully prepared, waiting for the night when the whispers would finally reveal themselves. At first, I convinced myself that moving in with Melissa was the right choice. The house was bright, spotless, buzzing with life, in a way my old home near the shore no longer was. For a little while, I let myself believe the silence of grief had been traded for comfort. But then slowly, almost invisibly, at first, the cracks began to show. It started with Daniel and the pillbox. One evening, he appeared in my room, holding a plastic organizer with neat compartments labeled Monday through Sunday. "Here, Evelyn," he said with a smile that felt more like a smirk. "This way you won't forget your pills. Forget." The word burned me. For decades, I managed my medications with precision. I had cared for Henry through every dose of his heart pills, never once mixing them up. "I don't need that," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Daniel chuckled, condescending. "It's for your own good. Seniors get confused sometimes." Confused. That word echoed in my skull long after he left the room. The next week, my phone refused to connect to the Wi-Fi. "The router's broken," Melissa said, her tone light, her smile too rehearsed. "Daniel will fix it this weekend." But the weekend came and went. Another week, then another, no repair. Whenever I asked, the excuses multiplied. Without the internet, I felt cut off, like someone had drawn a curtain between me and the outside world. My friends' calls dwindled. My church emails never reached me. Every attempt I made to stay connected was quietly strangled. Then came the mail. I found the first envelope already opened on the counter, my bank statement. "Must have been a mistake," Melissa insisted, her eyes darting away. But mistake after mistake followed. Envelopes slit neatly open. My private letters handled before I could read them. Each small thing could have been brushed aside. Each alone might have been forgivable. But together they wove a net around me, thread by thread. Pillbox, router, mail. Every thread meant to tighten a trap. Only Ethan made me pause, made me hesitate in my suspicions. 17 years old, tall and awkward, with his father's dark hair, but Melissa's softer eyes. At first he avoided me, barely muttering hello at dinner. He'd retreat to his room, headphones clamped on the door closed. But sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, I caught the flicker of worry in his gaze. A glance that lingered a beat too long, a clenched jaw when Daniel teased me about forgetting things. One evening, as we cleared the dinner table, I dropped a fork by accident. It clattered against the tile. Everyone else ignored it, but Ethan bent down, handed it back to me, and whispered so low I almost missed it. "Don't believe everything they say." For a second, the air left my lungs. My hands trembled as I set the fork on the counter, pretending nothing had happened. But his words burrowed into me. Ethan knew something. He wasn't just a bystander. He was trapped, too. And suddenly I realized I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't paranoid. The house that looked so perfect was slowly turning into a cage. Ethan's whispered warning haunted me. "Don't believe everything they say." Those 5 words rang in my ears for days, like the tolling of a distant bell I couldn't ignore. I began to notice more the way Daniel lowered his voice whenever I entered a room, the sudden silence when Melissa's phone buzzed and she slipped outside to take the call. The air in that house grew heavier by the hour, like smoke seeping into my lungs. And then came the night when the smoke turned into fire. It was past midnight, the house hushed, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't sleep. My chest was tight, my mind restless. I got up for a glass of water, padding softly down the hallway. That's when I heard it, Daniel's voice, low but sharp, carrying from his office near the front of the house. The door was cracked, light spilling out in a thin slice across the floor. I crept closer. "She won't know until it's too late," Daniel muttered. "The papers are already signed. Dr. Collins came through for us. Said her memory's slipping, early dementia. That's all we need." My stomach lurched. My own doctor, Dr. Collins, the man who had treated Henry and me for 20 years, selling me off with a lie. A second voice filtered through the speakerphone. Female, older, coated in steel. Margaret Hayes. Daniel's mother. "Good," she said. "That house in Galveston is worth a fortune. With the sale and her pension, Melissa and Ethan will be set for years. And you," her tone sharpened, "you can finally clear your debts. Don't forget why we're doing this. I lost everything once because I trusted the wrong people. Never again. This time we take what's ours." Her words clawed into me. My home, my memories with Henry. The garden we planted, the porch where we watched the tide roll in, all of it reduced to numbers in Margaret's ledger of losses. Daniel chuckled darkly. "She still thinks Melissa brought her here out of love. By tomorrow she'll be in a facility. Once she's admitted, she won't have a say in anything." Facility. The word landed like a hammer on my chest. My throat tightened as if invisible hands were choking me. I pressed a palm against the wall to steady myself. The betrayal wasn't just Daniel's, it was Melissa's too. My daughter, my flesh and blood. Silent in the background, but complicit, letting this plan unfold under her roof. Margaret's voice crackled again, colder than the night air. "Don't get sentimental, Daniel. Weakness is expensive. Take control before she realizes what's happening. By the time she figures it out, it'll be over." I felt my pulse in my temples pounding. My body trembled, but my mind had never been sharper. Every detail seared into me, the names, the lies, the money, the bribe. That night, I understood the truth in full. They weren't just planning to take my freedom. They were planning to erase me. And for the first time in months, my fear twisted into something else, something burning. Rage. The moment I stepped back from Daniel's office door, my body was trembling so hard I had to clutch the banister for balance. Rage had replaced fear, yes, but rage alone wouldn't save me. If they had signed papers, if Dr. Collins had lied on my behalf, then time was no longer on my side. By morning, I wouldn't be Evelyn. Carter, retired teacher and widow. I would be patient number whatever in some sterile hallway stripped of my name, my voice, my life. I knew I had to leave tonight. I went to my room with the quietness of a thief and pulled out the old brown envelope I had hidden deep in my dresser drawer. Inside were the things that defined me, the proof of my existence, my savings book, my will, my birth certificate, and a few faded photographs of Henry and me on the Galveston shore. I pressed those photos against my chest, whispering, "Henry, guide me now." The rain had started an hour earlier, tapping against the window like impatient fingers. Good, I thought. The storm would cover my tracks. I slipped on my old navy raincoat, shoved the envelope inside, and tied my shoes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The back window of the ground floor, the one with the faulty latch, was my escape. I pushed it open inch by inch, holding my breath with every squeak. The cool air hit me first, damp and sharp with the scent of wet grass. Then I swung my leg over, landing silently on the soaked lawn. The night was alive with sounds, the steady drum of rain, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant roar of thunder. I pulled the hood over my head and began to move my shoes, sinking slightly into the muddy ground. Each step felt louder than it was my heartbeat, thundering louder still. Halfway across the yard, I froze. A low growl cut through the storm. The neighbor's dog. Its chain rattled as it sniffed the air. My throat closed. I pressed myself against the hedge, praying the darkness and the rain would hide me. Seconds dragged like hours. The growling quieted. The dog retreated. I dared not move until the rain swallowed every sound again. When I reached the side gate, I pushed gently. It gave way with a moan of rusted hinges, the noise far too loud for my comfort. I slipped through and found myself on the empty street, drenched in yellow pools of light cast by the street lamps. And then the glare of headlights. A police cruiser rolled slowly past wipers slashing across its windshield. My lungs locked. To them, I was just an old woman wandering alone in the storm. But if Daniel had already whispered his version of events, if the lies had already begun, I could be seen as exactly what they wanted: confused, lost, senile. I pressed my back to a telephone pole, rain streaming down my face, whispering to myself, "Don't move, don't breathe." The car passed. Its red taillights faded into the distance. My knees nearly buckled, but I forced them steady. 10 blocks to Rosa's house. 10 blocks between captivity and freedom. I pulled the envelope tighter against my chest and stepped into the storm. Tonight, I wasn't a victim. Tonight, I was escaping. By the time I reached Rosa's street, my legs were trembling, my raincoat heavy as lead. Each breath felt stolen, each step a defiance against the fate they had planned for me. I climbed the porch of her little yellow house and knocked 3 soft raps that sounded like thunder to my ears. For a moment, nothing. Then footsteps. The rattle of locks. The door cracked open, and there she was, Rosa Alvarez, my old colleague from the school where we both taught English. Her gray hair tumbled loose, her robe pulled tight around her. "Evelyn," she whispered, blinking as if I were a ghost. "It's me," I said, my voice breaking. "Please let me in." She didn't hesitate. Rosa pulled me inside, slammed the door, and wrapped me in the warmth of her arms. The smell of chamomile and old books filled the room. I collapsed onto her sofa, the envelope clutched to my chest, tears mingling with rainwater on my cheeks. "Oh my God," Rosa breathed. "What happened to you?" The words spilled out of me in broken pieces. The whispers I'd overheard, the signed papers, the bribe to Dr. Collins, the plan to erase me from my own life. With every detail, Rosa's face hardened, her jaw set like stone. "Those monsters," she muttered. "They don't know who they're dealing with." Her words struck me with the force of memory. Years ago, Rosa had lived in a prison of her own, a violent husband who broke more than just furniture. I had been the one to stand beside her in court to help her find her voice again when silence had nearly consumed her. Now the roles were reversed. "You once told me," she said, taking my trembling hands in hers, "that no one deserves to live in fear in their own home. Well, Evelyn, you're not going to live in fear now. Not on my watch." I nodded, though my chest was tight. Gratitude, shame, relief, it all tangled together. The clock ticked past 3 when Rosa handed me a blanket and insisted I rest. But rest never came. My mind replayed every word from Daniel and Margaret, every false smile from Melissa, every quiet glance from Ethan. Then Rosa's landline rang loud in the silence. We froze. She answered, her voice cautious. A pause. Her eyes widened. She pressed the receiver into my hand. Grandma Ethan's voice cracked on the other end. "It's me." My heart clenched. "Ethan, are you safe?" His words tumbled out in a rush. "Grandma, they're telling the neighbors you're confused. They said you wandered off." Mom's crying in front of everyone and Dad's talking about calling the police. "They're going to report you missing, say you're sick. Please, you have to be careful." The room tilted around me. The trap was already tightening. If the police believed their lies, my escape would be painted as proof of their story. "Listen to me, Ethan," I whispered fiercely, my voice low but steady. "I am not sick. I am not confused. And you, my boy, you know the truth. Hold on to it, no matter what they say." There was silence on the line, then a broken sob. "I believe you, Grandma. I swear I do." Ethan's whispered vow echoed in my ears long after the line went dead. "I believe you, Grandma." It was the thread I clung to in the storm of lies closing in around me, but belief alone wouldn't save me. I needed something stronger, proof protection power. That morning, Rosa drove me in her old Buick to a modest brick office downtown. The brass plate on the door read, "David Monroe, Attorney at Law." I hadn't seen David in years, but he had been Henry's closest friend, a man whose loyalty had never wavered. He rose from behind his desk when I entered, his eyes softening at the sight of me. "Evelyn," he said, voice heavy with concern, "Henry would never forgive me if I didn't help you. Sit down. Tell me everything." And so I did. The whispers at night, the signed papers, Dr. Collins's betrayal, Daniel's mother urging them on. My voice shook at times, but David's gaze never wavered. He took notes, his pen scratching furiously, his jaw tightening with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back, folding his hands. "This isn't just family betrayal," he said, his voice firm. "This is elder abuse, conspiracy, financial exploitation, and medical fraud. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, your son-in-law and his mother are in deeper trouble than they can imagine." Relief rushed through me like air after drowning. But David wasn't finished. "We'll need evidence, Evelyn. Hard evidence. Witnesses, documents, recordings. Without it, they'll paint you as delusional." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. I opened it with trembling hands. Attached were photographs, one of a contract with my name half signed, detailing the sale of my Galveston home, another of text messages from Daniel to Dr. Collins. "I'll transfer the money tonight. Make sure the report says early dementia." My stomach turned, but my heart pounded with hope. I passed the phone to David. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the screen, then let out a sharp breath. "This is exactly what we need." He looked up, determination flashing in his eyes. "With this, we can go to a judge, but I'm going to take it further." He picked up the phone and dialed. "Janice, it's David. I need you on a case immediately." I frowned. "Who's Janice?" "A private investigator," he said, covering the receiver. "The best. She's uncovered fraud schemes twice as tangled as this. If Daniel and Margaret have financial skeletons, and I'm certain they do, she'll find them." Hearing that name, Margaret, sent a chill through me. I could almost hear her voice again, cold and commanding. "Weakness is expensive." David ended the call. "Janice will start by tracking Daniel's bank records and Margaret's past business dealings. If we can prove motive debts, losses, shady transfers, it will crush their credibility. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt the ground steady beneath me. The enemy had money, lies, and manipulation. But I had something they underestimated: the law, the truth, and the will of a woman who refused to vanish quietly. David's plan moved faster than I could have imagined. Within days, papers were filed, motions set, and a hearing scheduled. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its cold marble steps echoing beneath my shoes as Rosa squeezed my hand for courage. I told myself to breathe, to stand tall, to remember who I was. But when I walked into that courtroom and saw Daniel already seated, sharp suit pressed, smirk tugging at his mouth, my knees almost buckled. He wasn't alone. Beside him sat Melissa. Eyes red, a tissue clutched in her hand. My daughter, my own flesh and blood. She wouldn't look at me. And on the other side, their attorney, a man whose name carried weight, the kind of lawyer corporations hire to bury the truth. His voice was smooth as silk, but sharp as broken glass. He began with venom dressed as sympathy. "Mrs. Carter," he said, turning toward me as if addressing a fragile child, "has been struggling since the tragic loss of her husband. Confusion. Paranoia, signs of dementia confirmed by her physician, Dr. Collins. What we have here is not malice, but concern. A loving family trying to protect their matriarch from herself." Melissa broke into practiced sobs, her voice quivering. "She isn't the same, Your Honor. My mother, she forgets things, she accuses us of things that never happened. We only want her safe." Each word was a knife twisted deeper because it came from her. I wanted to scream, to shout, "You know the truth, Melissa." But I stayed silent, my heart pounding like war drums. Then David stood, calm, steady. His voice carried the weight of justice itself. "Your Honor, concern doesn't sound like this." He pressed play on a recorder. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom, sharp and cold. "Are you coming back now, or are you going to regret it? We'll make you look incompetent, and no one will believe a word you say." The room gasped. Even the judge's eyes narrowed. David let the silence stretch before continuing. "Is that the voice of a caring son-in-law, or the voice of a man plotting to strip a woman of her rights?" He moved swiftly, laying down Ethan's photographs, the forged contract to sell my house, the text messages of bribes to Dr. Collins. Each image hit the defense like a hammer blow. And then came the twist that made the room erupt. David's investigator, Janice, had traced funds leaving my account transfers disguised as medical care routed straight into Margaret Hayes' business account. The woman who sat smugly in the gallery went pale as her name was read aloud. Finally, David called Ethan. My grandson walked slowly to the stand, shoulders stiff, but his voice rang out clear. My grandmother is not crazy. She never was. I saw my dad's phone. I saw the messages. I heard the threats, and I know they were planning to take everything from her. The courtroom exploded in murmurs, the truth too loud to be ignored. Daniel leapt up, shouting, "Liar!" But the judge's gavel slammed down, silencing him. For the first time in months, I lifted my chin. They had tried to make me invisible. But in that moment, before the eyes of the court, I was seen. The gavel struck once, twice, like thunder splitting the air. Silence fell across the courtroom, heavy and waiting. The judge's voice cut through, steady as stone. Mrs. Carter is in full possession of her mental faculties. She is competent, lucid, and capable of managing her own affairs. The words washed over me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For weeks I had been told I was confused, unstable, a burden. Now here, before the law and the world, the truth had been spoken aloud. I was not broken. I was not gone. I was me. But the judge did not stop there. Her gaze sharpened, turning to Daniel and Margaret. As for you, Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, your actions raise serious concerns. This court is forwarding all evidence of fraud, financial exploitation, and medical deception to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Margaret's face drained of color, her hands gripping her handbag like a lifeline. Daniel's smirk shattered, replaced by rage he could barely contain. He shouted something about lies, about manipulation, but the bailiff's warning glance shut him down. For the first time, Daniel looked small, trapped, cornered. And then the hammer fell hardest of all. Dr. Collins, the judge, continued, "Your medical license is hereby suspended, pending further review. This court has reason to believe you falsified documents in exchange for payment. The state medical board will be notified immediately." The man who once reassured me through Henry's worst nights of illness now slumped in his seat, sweat beading his forehead. A healer turned traitor, stripped of the very power he had abused. Beside them, Melissa broke. Her sobs were no longer rehearsed, no longer theatrical. They were raw, guttural, the sound of someone realizing the ground beneath her life had collapsed. She turned toward me. Her mascara streaked her lips, trembling. "Mom," she whispered, though no one else seemed to hear. "I didn't know. I thought—" Daniel said. Her words dissolved into tears, and I saw it then, the truth behind her betrayal. She had not been the architect, but the accomplice driven by fear debt and the poison of a husband who had promised salvation while dragging her deeper into ruin. For a fleeting moment, pity flickered in my chest, but pity could not erase the scars of her silence, her signatures, her complicity. The session ended with a final crack of the gavel. My name restored, my freedom affirmed, my property protected. I walked out of that courtroom not as a burden, not as a victim, but as Evelyn Carter, the woman who had refused to vanish quietly. At my side was Ethan. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He simply slipped his hand into mine and said, "Grandma, I want to stay with you." His voice was steady, his eyes clear. In that moment, I knew he had chosen not just me, but the truth. The courthouse doors swung open and the air outside felt different, cleaner, sharper, freer. Daniel and Margaret faced investigation. Collins faced disgrace. Melissa faced her own reflection. And me, I had my life back. When Ethan and I stepped out of the courthouse that day, the sky looked different, brighter, as if the storm that had hovered over me for months had finally broken, leaving the air washed clean. My name had been cleared, my freedom protected, but I knew this wasn't the end. Survival was not enough. I needed to transform pain into purpose. In the weeks that followed, Rosa urged me to write. "Put it down, Evelyn," she said, sliding a notebook across her kitchen table. "Don't let them steal your story, too." And so I began. Each morning, with coffee steaming beside me, I wrote page after page. The nights of whispers, the betrayal wrapped in smiles, the courtroom, the gavel, the truth. I poured it all into words until my hand cramped and my heart ached. Months later, those pages became a book, No One Takes My Voice. Holding the first copy in my hands felt like reclaiming the part of me they had tried to erase. It wasn't just my story anymore, it was a weapon for others, a beacon for anyone who had ever been told they were too old, too weak, too silent. But I didn't stop there. With David's help, I founded the Carter Foundation, dedicated to protecting seniors from abuse and exploitation. We offered legal aid hotlines and a network of volunteers ready to step in where families had failed. I stood before crowded rooms, community centers, libraries, churches, and told my story. My voice didn't tremble anymore. It rose, it carried, it reached. And Ethan, my sweet steadfast, Ethan found his calling in those moments. "Grandma," he said one night as we sat on the porch, "I want to study law. Not for me, for people like you. For people who don't have anyone to fight for them." I saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire I once carried when I stood in front of my students and told them the world could be changed with words. He wasn't just my grandson anymore. He was my legacy. Melissa. Her journey was different. She came to me, broken her face, stripped of makeup, her voice trembling with apologies. "I let him control me," she whispered. "I let fear make me weak. I don't deserve your forgiveness." For a long time, I said nothing. Forgiveness, I knew, wasn't a gift handed over in a single moment. It was earned, rebuilt, piece by piece. I let her visit. I let her try. Time would decide the rest. Now, years later, I tend to my rose garden every morning. The same roses Henry once planted, now blooming stronger than ever. Their thorns remind me of battles fought. Their blossoms remind me of victories won. As I water them, the sunlight warming my shoulders, I breathe in freedom, freedom. I nearly lost freedom I now guard fiercely. I am Evelyn Carter, teacher, widow, survivor. No one took my voice. And as long as I breathe, no one ever will.